please. Cell phones are silenced. Silence cell phones, please. It's a shame we have to say that anymore, but that's okay. So, this is not the regular board meeting yet. This is a special work session that we're holding with Marquette Board of Light and Power to get some information on their expected new project.
New power plant.
So I don't know if Eric's going to present?
Yep,
Who's-
yes, I will.
Okay. Do you, does the board want to just hear the presentation? Do you want to ask questions? I'm thinking Eric might want to just get through everything, or how?
I can start with the presentation if you'd like, unless you guys wanted to start with any kind of comments ahead of time.
I think we're good. Do we need to do any kind of roll call, or you just
Not for a work session.
want to make sure? Okay. Go right ahead.
And actually, he is wired wirelessly also along with that microphone. So if he goes back to this, you don't need to use that, but that screen behind you, that'll be better for that with that wireless.
Okay, can you
you're
guys
good.
hear me?
You're
The-
good.
The mic is working. Thank you guys for having us. It's important for us to get this information out to the public so that they know what's going on and why and where and what led to the decision. My name's Eric Booth. I've been with the Board of Light and Power 14 years. Before I get into my history, I should start with, we're not here to sell the project. We're not here to promote anything. We're here to show you what we looked at and what conditions changed to force us into action. We are a municipal utility. We're not a for-profit business. Our goal isn't to build or get bigger. Our goal is simply to serve our ratepayers. There's an electrical demand that has to be met, and we have a legal obligation to meet that. To go back to my history, I spent 11 years at that steam plant. First 11 years of my career, they pulled me out of the steam plant in 2009 to manage the Tourist Park project. It was having some difficulty. They put me as project manager. We got that built in 2013. And then they thought, well, you did a decent enough job with that. Let's put you in charge of planning in 2013. And that was a good move because we hadn't done much planning in the last 20 years. We really haven't had the need. We had built Shirus Unit 3, and that's what's kept our rate stable for a 30-year period. Very controversial decision when it was made. 43% rate increase. Coal-fired power plant was actually voted down. And we had to deny people service. Well, you can't do that nowadays, but that's what was done in the 1980s. 1 year after it was voted down, it was approved and built. Couldn't be built fast enough, so we had to put a peaker in the interim. Been a very good decision. These are tough decisions, though, for communities to make and for ratepayers to undertake. It's a hit. It's a rate increase. When you have to do these things, if you haven't proactively managed your rates and set them incrementally so that when you make these large steps, they're a small incremental step. We didn't do that. We kept our rate stable for 20 years. Looking back, that wasn't the right decision, but we're at where we're at, and we need to make this move now. So before I get into any details on our system and what we look at on a daily basis, this is the utility system from the outside world. It's the UP electrical grid, and it's a good system. ATC spent a lot of money in the Upper Peninsula, but they spent it before units 1 through 5 went down to Presque Isle. And so when those units were taken offline, because We Energies was building generation in Wisconsin, which makes sense for their business model, now there's a slight imbalance with the grid if they lose a unit on their end, or even if we lose a small unit on our end. Now they've announced plans to retire in 2020. The environmental regulations are probably going to shut that plant down. So two things have to happen. Either transmission needs to get built, or new generation has to be constructed. We don't know what's going to end up happening. We hope both happen, but we don't know. Right now we've got one transformer that ties us in to the grid. If that thing was to fail, we have 3 weeks where we're islanded, which means we have to meet our electrical demand on our own. The UP is a wonderful place. This is just one of the challenges of living in the Upper Peninsula. Now, that loss of that transformer really hasn't been a problem in the past. but I'll show you how that's changed going forward. This is our electrical system. This is the Board of Light and Power's electrical system. I really should say it's the ratepayers' electrical system because we're a municipally owned utility. We have 2 units at the Shira Steam Plant that are operational. There are 3 units there, units 1, 2, and 3. Unit 1 is no longer functioning. It's an old unit. We couldn't light a fire in that if we tried. Unit 2 is 44 years old. It's a 20 megawatt unit. It's a stoker fire unit, so the coal gets thrown onto a bed and the air flows through and it burns. Not much different than a fireplace, really. It's not very efficient, though, and it's very costly to run. It burns a bituminous coal. That unit to run is about $100 a megawatt hour. The grid, about 45 when you add in transmission. Coincidentally, Unit 3 is about the price of the grid. It's a really economical unit because instead of throwing solid coal in the boiler, we pulverize it, we grind it up, and then we blow it in as a dust. Very efficient combustion, and it's a great unit. On top of that, Unit 3 was built after the Clean Water Act and Clean Air Act, so it's got all the bells and whistles. They weren't happy about putting them on at the time because that was an additional $7.5 million, but thank God they did because we're sitting good with that unit now. CO2 rules, completely different animal, and I think you'll see when we get through this how this future energy project's going to help us maintain compliance with Shira's going forward. Unit 2 is a little different animal. We don't have all the pollution controls on that. It's got a baghouse. All it does is collect the dust. Doesn't remove SO2 and it burns a pretty high sulfur product. So it puts out a lot of SO2 emissions and a lot of NOx emissions, which are oxides of nitrogen. We have a combustion turbine that runs on fuel oil. We don't run that much. That's an expensive unit to run. That's just an emergency generator. But I'll tell you what, when the 2003 flood hit, the Silver Lake flood, and it took the Presque Isle power plant offline, we ran that thing. We put 2 million gallons of fuel oil through that unit that year. We were glad to have it. We have a couple hydros, not real big, built in the 1920s. Great units. They got long lifespans. They're in great shape, no problems. You can't use them for planning purposes because they're intermittent. This fall we had kind of a dry period and they didn't produce much power, but we love it in the spring when they produce a bunch. The proposed generating facility is 50 megawatts. Now it's 3 units, but our goal is the megawatts, not the number of units. We think we've developed it in a way that's creative enough that gives us multiple options, but the 50 megawatts is what we have to shoot for. And here's why. So this is you guys. This is your demand. This is Kohl's, Target, the hospital, the wastewater treatment plant, drinking water plant, the township building that we're powering right now. This is your electrical demand. That's what we have to meet at all times. And we can do that a variety of ways. We can use Unit 3, which is 44 megawatts, Unit 2, which is 20, and the combustion turbine, which is 23. Now, we're well above that peak, which is good. A utility system has to have some room, has to have some reserve margin, just in case peak grows, right? You can't throw these things in the ground quickly. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of planning. It takes a lot of process to get these things done. But we're well set up, and that's set up from the decisions that were made in the mid-70s and the 80s. So life is good for us. The problem is if we lose our base load unit. So now I took the other 2 off because we don't normally have those on. We normally have just Unit 3 on, and we buy the difference from the grid. Now those areas where they're kind of clumped together and they're above that blue bar, we do dispatch Unit 2 just to cover ourselves in case we lose Unit 3. If Unit 3 blows a tube, it's a mechanical piece of equipment. Things go down, and we got to make sure we can cover our needs. But if 2 is not online and we drop 3 off, all we can do is dispatch a CT quickly in 10 minutes, and that's what we can cover. That's kind of short. We can bring Unit 2 online, but it takes 8 to 10 hours. And so that's what happens if Unit 3 drops off and we can't buy power off the grid. There's 2,888 hours of the year that we can't meet electrical demand. Now that's on the 215 hourly load curve. Under the 2014, everything had kind of shifted up. It was a colder year, and that number was about 3,400. But we want to make sure we gave you the latest data we had. And this is what the board looks at regularly too. So they'll give you a good indication of what the board's thinking was as they went forward and made their decisions on the resource plan. Now what we were doing is hedging that by buying 15 megawatts of firm transmission, and now look what the graph does. Now there's only 17 hours of the year where if we trip Unit 3, we're short 17. That's not a big window. You're pretty well covered at that. So we felt pretty comfortable with that, and we said that 2088, we're down to 17, life is good. we're okay. The problem was in October 2014, they took that 15 megawatts of firm transmission away. Presque Isle announced their plans to retire. ATC and MISO did an evaluation of the transmission system and said, if you're not a full network integrated transmission service customer, which we were not, we were just buying point to point. We only needed 15, that was all we needed to cover. You can't even get a megawatt. You can't get any firm. So now we're back to where we would be before we had the 15 megawatts of firm transmission. Now keep in mind, prior to MISO, all the utilities talked and worked back and forth together, so they coordinated their generation with their transmission and those capabilities. So we never really had a problem, but once they pulled the transmission systems away from the generators, when they deregulated the energy markets, this is the issue that resulted. We thought we were doing a good thing by buying the 15 megawatts firm, and really we were. We spent $1 million a year for about 7 years to avoid having to build new generation. Once we saw the new regulations come out for Unit 2, we knew we had to start making plans for future generation expansion. We had not done that before, at least the current regime that was running the utility. And so we ended up calling a large utility down in Lansing and said, what process should we follow to make sure we don't miss anything, to make sure our process is sound and fluid and we can defend it? And they said, make sure, since you're not utility system designers, you're just operators, go to a design engineering firm and have them lay you out a process flow diagram. And just pick it apart like you would an elephant, one bite at a time. Don't go out and do one massive study over 4 years and then maybe you're not happy with the results. Pick it apart into pieces. The load forecast that we had implemented by Burns & Mac actually just went through what I took you guys through. You just went at a real high level of a load forecasting study. But the study said you got to build something. Build something soon, within the next 5 to 7 years. Now, at the time, we had the 15 megawatts firm, so we said, yeah, 5 to 7 years, that's not a big deal, we can do that. And so they said, start with a review of your existing supply side resources. How long is Unit 3 going to last? How long is Unit 2 going to last? How long is the CT going to last? Environmentally, are they going to be able to meet compliance with the upcoming environmental regulations? And then, just to make sure you cover your base, do a transmission assessment. Is that an asset you can utilize? Is it going to be available? At the time, we had the 15 megawatts firm, so it was. Or is it not going to be available? Because that'll affect the outcome. That'll tell you what your need for future power supply is. That'll tell you what you need to do. Then you go through your portfolio options, and that lays everything out. Reciprocating internal combustion engines, simple cycle, hydros, hydroelectric power plants, biomass, wind, solar, the works, nuclear, fuel cells. It'll lay everything out for you. And then based on your need for power determination, you'll find out which options are applicable, which ones solve your problems, and which ones don't. And then you can optimize that based on that analysis. So, first thing we did, we looked at our existing resources and we said, okay, how long are they going to last us? So we brought in the original design engineers, Lutz, Daly, and Brain. The guy that put it in was still working. He's in his high 70s, but he's still working. And a real knowledgeable guy. And they actually built units 3, 2, 1, and the combustion turbine. So it was perfect. We were able to bring in the original folks to tear our system apart and say, how long are these assets going to last us? And they said, Unit 3 looks great. You guys have taken good care of it. It hasn't been ran hard. You got 20 years worth of operational life left out of it. Unit 2 probably got 20 years worth of operational life. It is going to take a little more investment to keep it going. And since it takes 8 to 10 hours to bring online, and you've lost your 15 megawatts firm, your need is really quick start generation, but it does have useful life to it, and we want to make sure we keep that thing in a proper shape so we can utilize it if we need to. The problem is the environmental controls that are needed are going to be a little more expensive than what it's worth to put in an old unit like that. Combustion turbine, not a lot of hours with the exception of 2003 when we had the flood. Not a lot of hours of life on that unit, so that's in very good shape. Hydroelectric plants, they're intermittent resources, so we don't use them for planning purposes, but those are in good shape as well. Now, the evaluation of the transmission assets, firm transmission is no longer available. They denied it in October 2014. That's not an asset that we can utilize. It's not something we can use for planning purposes. We're told it'll be available in 2019. Will it? We hope so, but we don't know. And that uncertainty is it's a little hard to swallow because they're going to hold us accountable for making sure we can meet the electrical demand. That's our charge. So the options that we evaluated, the need is quick start generation. We could have done a simple cycle combustion turbine, or we could have done reciprocating internal combustion engines, which kind of seemed like the norm for small communities of our size. But we looked at everything: biomass, wind, solar, hydro, fuel cells, battery storage, power purchase agreements. They'd be an option if the transmission was available. And we even, just to cover our base, checked coal-fired generation. But you're not building coal nowadays. I think everybody knows that. So the solution that our consultants, Sargent and Lundy, came up with was a reciprocating internal combustion plant. Now, just to go back full circle, our power supply planning analysis that we had done by Burns and McDonnell in 2012 said you're probably going to end up there. That's probably what you're going to end up doing. But go through the process anyways to make sure you've covered all your base. The reason why we split that up is so we could switch different consulting firms to build off the previous studies. So if the previous study had missed something or we didn't agree with the recommendation, we had a second set of eyes. Well, in this case, we've had 3 sets of eyes moving us towards this process. And the last set took us where the first one said it's probably where you're going to end up. Now, a couple questions. I've had a chance to call you guys, some of you today, and talk to you. And one question that we're hearing, you probably are too, is why would you build on a floodplain? This isn't on a floodplain. After the 2003 Silver Lake flood, FERC required the Board of Light and Power and UPCO to redo their flood inundation mapping, get it up to speed, put it into GIS. Silver Lake could go, Hoyst could go, McClure could go, Forestville could go, Tourist Parks downstream. It doesn't matter if that, it matters if it goes, but it's not going to impact this site. None of those impact that site. All of 4 upstream dams, we are out of the floodplain if they fail, which is good, because We Energies was in the floodplain when the Silver Lake Dam failed, and that didn't work out so well. So here's what we're looking at. Let's go full circle. Here's your demand. Here's what you're drawing from the system or demanding of the system. If we lose Unit 3 now, this is what the picture looks like. The nice thing about this is instead of 1 large unit, there are 3 separate units, so we can bring them online as that demand changes. When we partner that with the combustion turbine, if transmission is not available, if it is, we'll probably buy if it's cheapest. But if it's curtailable, if they say we can't give it to you, we have to have something we could hit a button and fire up. It puts us right back into the same situation we were in when they made the decision in 1983 to build all their units. We're looking at a very similar situation if 3 drops off. And as 3 gets older, it probably will have more forced outages. And regardless, even if it didn't have a forced outage, when CO2 regulations hit, we will be taking that unit offline for a period of the year. That's going to happen. And so it was important for us, rather than to just solve this one problem today, it had to look at the long-term availability. How does it fit into the longer range picture? Can we use these when we have to take Unit 3 offline? We're trying to solve multiple problems with this. So what does it mean for the ratepayers? Reliability. That's what it gives us. If the grid curtails us, we can still provide power. If we lose the transformer that ties us into the grid and we're down for 3 weeks or we're islanded for 3 weeks, we can still provide power. Now we have to do dual fuel on these units because just like the transmission system, the gas system is constrained. Not a problem in the spring, summer, and fall. Problem in the wintertime. If gas is available, we'll use it. If it's not, we have to run it on fuel oil while we're bringing Unit 3 up if we need to. Now the goal is to run Unit 3 in the wintertime so we don't have to worry about a gas curtailment. But if 3 trips, we have to have something to back it up. And right now we can't rely on the grid. So the real question is, if we make this kind of a move today, can we remain competitive in the future? And so this is a graph of what our costs would be for a rural customer, since we're in the township, not an urban, and the difference between urban and rural, so city versus township, it isn't a heck of a lot. It's probably $4 or $5 a month on 500 kilowatt hours, but it's a difference. So we want to make sure we're using rural numbers. A bill is looking somewhere, I'm sorry, that's a little smaller print for me. It's somewhere around the neighborhood of $85 a month for your energy cost. If you're using the average person, I use just a little shade under 500. Some people are up in the 800. And we have to be careful when we're designing our rates. And this is not something that I would have thought originally. But we designed them in a way where we moved some of it into the fixed cost, some into the variable component. And the concern is, or the general perception, and I had this too, was if you move too much in the fixed cost, you're hurting your low-income customer. Well, and our rate consultant ended up pulling our customer data, and they started looking at the low-income housing units. Low income doesn't really necessitate or equal low usage. It seems kind of counterintuitive though a little bit until you think about it. They can't afford a $900 Energy Star fridge. They're using space heaters. A lot of them use electric heat. If you move all your rate increase into your variable component, those are the people that are going to be affected the hardest. And so you have to balance that out. And they do balance that out based on our demographics. They did a good job for us. I wouldn't have thought this until they did this study. But it's amazing once you see the data. You really do need to look at the details to do it right. And you guys are probably getting this from me. We are not a soundbite business. There's a lot of data and a lot of evaluation, which is great if you're an engineer. I'm an engineer. I graduated from tech. So we like data. We like tables and charts, and we get all kind of geeked out about that stuff. The average person isn't like that, but we have to run it right. And if there's a misperception out there, or we have to explain a position, we should be happy to do that. And we've talked to folks too. You're hurting the low-income customer. No, we're not. We're trying to do this in a way that's most fair to them. Here's what we can do as a municipal utility to help you guys, though. Help the township, help the residents, help businesses. We've enjoyed rates that are so low for so long. Not everybody's that efficient in their management of their energy. We see it all the time. We go out to homes and people are saying, man, my usage is high, and we pull up their bill. Holy cow, your usage is really high. We'll send a crew out and take a peek at that, see if there's something wrong with your meter. We're out there, we test the meter, nothing wrong. I'll give you a perfect example. Happened last winter. We asked the homeowner, can we look in your house? Can we take a peek around? Something's not right here. You are using a heck of a lot more energy than you should. Yeah, sure, go ahead. Had a piece of drywall hung up in it, or laid up in his garage, hitting a thermostat. His garage was heated, had bumped it up. His garage was really warm. Then he had a space heater going out to his dog kennel to heat his dog kennel. And we said, when did you turn that on? Well, a month ago. That's extremely inefficient out there. I mean, that sucker's probably running 24/7. Oh yeah, it runs all the time. That's why your usage is so high. With LED bulbs, we're going to get ready to go from 75 watts down to 9. That's amazing. But we got to start making those moves. We can help you do that. You don't have to do that on your own. Call us up. We want to help you with that. We have a goal we have to maintain, a state mandated goal, a 1% reduction in energy sales. So by you calling us up so we can help you out, you're helping us out. Stabilize your bills. It makes a big difference when you can get a stable bill and get on a budget program versus experiencing highs and lows. And I'll give you a perfect example of that. Here is a residential customer on Craig Street. And they have months where they're down to $40 a month. And then they have months where they're close to $100 a month. It's my folks. They go to Florida in March. Don't use any power. With the rate increase, the 30%, they're going to go to 60 from 40 to 120 from 100 at a peak. If they got on a budget, which they are, they pay $90 a month. If we've overestimated on that, we'll credit your bill. Or we'll send you a check. We don't keep that money if we overestimate. We check it twice a year to make sure we don't overestimate or underestimate, because we don't want you owing us a big check if we underestimate, and we don't really want to be crediting back a big amount if we overestimate. It's the fairest thing for our ratepayers. But these are things that we can do to help you out. If we can get customers to sign up for auto pay and avoid late payments, huge benefit. It's amazing how many people, and some people can't pay because they're having money issues, and that's legit. But other people just, they don't get around to it. They try to do bill pay through their credit union. I forgot to get on there. They're paying late fees, and they start racking up. And it starts getting more expensive. If you sign up for auto payments, you can avoid late fees altogether. It's another way to help stabilize your bill. Going back to the energy optimization, I did skip over this, I apologize. The website that we put on our first slide, michiganenergy.org, takes you to this page. And you can click on it whether you're a business or a resident, And we have all sorts of programs that have been implemented. In fact, last year I just started a manufactured housing program, because those folks do tend to be, not all of them, I'm not generalizing, but some of them folks are low income. And mobile homes are very, very inefficient. And so we built a program tailored specifically to them. And that's the flexibility we have with our programs, is we can build them based on our residents' needs. And so we can put a little more money into that because it's a low income and it's a manufactured housing program. But if you're a business, click on that. Start seeing what's available, whether it's HVAC replacement, LED lighting, insulation. And if you don't see something you want to see, call us up. And we'll see if there's a demand. Maybe we can build a program for you. We've done that in the past. Working together, and we're going to have to. We're going to have to work together to manage electrical usage going into the future. The demands of the 1% reduction that were required in the state right now is likely to grow. It's not going to get any easier, and it's going to get harder. And actually, the cheapest energy we can produce is stuff we don't need to produce. We're just a pass-through. We charge our customers what it costs to produce power, whether we buy it from the grid, whether we generate it ourselves. If we don't have to generate it, that's savings for us, that's savings for you. We're not a for-profit organization. So that's the bulk of it. I know some of you probably have questions, and I did bring some backup slides, and nothing is off limits. We're willing to talk about anything, anything that the board deliberated, what they were thinking, the process that we used to arrive to this conclusion, the public process that we used, things that we did to try to get the public engaged. Everything's on the table. I'll turn it over to you guys. Fire away.
Okay. Thanks, Eric. Appreciate
problem.
that and all your hard work putting this together. I don't imagine this was a very easy decision. I think the community probably realizes it's necessary. We've heard a lot of the talk on the news media about what's happening at the legislative level and negotiations and We Energies and plants are closing and they're not. And people don't know what that means. They don't know, they don't understand. I like the hourly usage to show what's happening in the township. That's important, and that's what we're here for, is to try to educate. What I wish, speaking of educating, is that this had been done 6 months ago or a year ago. We needed to know this, and shame on whoever was involved that didn't tell us or didn't warn us or mail us or whatever. And I'm not pointing fingers, I'm just saying this is important stuff, and we should have really been talking about it sooner, so that you could have had the input you needed to help make the decision. Because now, apparently, we're stuck with the decision, right or wrong, good or bad. Trying to come up with a 40% increase or 50 or 30, whatever it ends up being, is going to be really rough for everybody. Doesn't matter if you're a veteran on a pension or you're a big box store who might have just gotten their taxes reduced. But everybody in between. And we talked about this, how this is going to affect the county. If there's 17,000, we've got 4,000 residents. I don't know how many of them are on BLP because the township has 3 different energy sources. BLP is not exclusive. It's going to affect the businesses, it's going to affect everybody. So my concern, I know each board member has a different concern, mine's the financial part of it, is how do we, as a community, bringing tourists up and dealing with the top 10 in biking and trails, and we're bringing these people up, telling them this is the place to come, and then we may see the downside of companies or businesses or people leaving because they can't afford whatever. So the financial part of it is important to me for everybody. So you talked about the budget idea and being able to work with people and organizations on saving them money, saving energy. That's kind of a two-sided sword, because you need those kinds of funds to help fuel, pardon the pun, your project. How are you going to balance that? What if everybody comes in?
Only in some aspect, Lynn. In the variable component of your energy rate is our O&M, operation and maintenance, and fuel. And so if you can cut back on your electrical usage, we cut back on our fuel. which cuts back on our fuel expense. That's why you've got to balance your rate between the fixed and the variable component. Your metering, your distribution, your transmission system, and a portion of your fixed generating assets. That's how we're going to do that going forward, is we'll be balancing those out over the next 3 to 4 years. So if electrical usage does drop, that's a good thing, because out of the 14 cents, 5 cents of it's fuel. So if we can start moving some of those costs into the fixed component, that's how we'll be able to make those payments.
So how are you seeing, if you're saying, and you really didn't talk about any of the financing part of it. If
Sure.
you're saying you need to have us have this 40-some% increase to build the facility, is that exclusively what it's for?
No, it's everything. It's all the operations.
Okay, so that number could be less then.
How?
That's what I'm wondering.
No.
That was a question.
That's actually a good, Randy, can you pull up that second presentation? Thanks.
This one right here?
Mm-hmm. Should be the one that says extras, I'm sorry. Perfect. So let's go through that, Lynn, because that's a good question. This is an example of our rate structure and what it could have been. And we ended up giving a presentation for the Department of Environmental Quality, and it was for municipal wastewater plants and drinking water plants. And it was to show them the effects of not incrementally moving your rates. So if you look for a 20-year period, which is the blue line, they were flat. We didn't move them at all. In fact, we were crediting back on a fuel adjustment. We're crediting back right now. We're crediting back about 1 cent per kWh. Then we made a series of steps, 8.5% increase. Now on the base rate, it looked really big, but they were already paying about 9.3 cents when you factored in fuel adjustment. So when we made the change, we went from 9.3 to 9.8. The base rate was only 7.4 though. So that fuel adjustment added about 2 cents. It became 20% of someone's bill. So how we operated at the steam plant, whether we had to buy power, burn expensive coal, your bill, your electrical usage might not have changed a bit, but your bill might have changed anywhere from $4 to $20. And so by staying on top of our rates going forward, that's how we're going to keep competitive in the future. Had we just raised our rates 3.5% per year, we'd be at the same spot we're at today, but we wouldn't have had that large of a rate increase. We can't go through another 20-year period where we're scraping the bottom of the barrel, or we're going to be right back into the boat we're in today. We've got to start thinking ahead, planning ahead, proactively planning our rates. The 30% rate increase followed by the 2 4.5s, that's to make sure the utility as a whole, not just this project, stays sound. And it's common, right? I mean, we're governed by a board, you guys are governed by a board. You know, we always want to defer rate increases because we're always thinking about the people that are living hand to mouth, paycheck to paycheck. I get it. My mom and I lived for 1.5 years at those A-frame apartments on Sugarloaf Ave. That tells you a little bit about my financial background. That's tough, but guess what? 10 or 15 years from now, people are still going to be living hand to mouth. And we got to start making decisions that are more proactive on the financial aspect so that we're not impacting those folks, because they're going to be there. There's always going to be people in that position, and we've got to start thinking about them too. No one wants to raise rates. We don't want to either. Sometimes it's good to be forced in a position because then it forces you to take a different look at things, and that's where we're at today.
That's kind of what I was hoping you would do. Is there any, we talked about this today too, is there any way, I don't know how the grid is set up, that we can, even in the future, start spreading this cost out, whether we co-op with somebody or join forces with Alger Delta, or I don't know how that's set up, so what are our options going forward?
Our utility is a closed system, which means we can't go out and actively try to bring in customers, but then other utilities can't come in and try to get ours either. And you say, even with this rate increase, if we're still lower than the neighboring utilities, why would someone leave the Board of Light and Power? Well, if you're Target or Kohl's or Lowe's, and they do a regional contract with DTE or consumers, they don't care if Marquette's paying, their Marquette store's paying higher, as long as regionally they're saving money. And that's why the board decided, I don't know, it was probably 6, 7 years ago, that opening our markets probably wasn't in the best interest. We're not big business. We're not trying to grow. We're not trying to expand. We're just here to serve. And so by opening our markets, which could be done, might not be in the best interest for the Marquette residents. Might be in the best interest for a couple large box stores.
Well, what happens as the township expands, whether it's box stores or residential areas? We have people that, are building homes and
We can
properties
serve them.
going west. How's that going to affect what you're
If
planning
they're-
on doing?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, we'd love you to bring in businesses, right? Build. That's a good thing. That will keep costs down because they'll be paying a portion of that. And thankfully, we've built with enough planning in mind, enough reserve in mind, that we can cover that increased demand. And so there's no barrier from the Board of Light and Power to build, especially now. I mean, the one comment we got over the past couple years is, how are you preparing your utility system to where if we want to bring in a customer, we can guarantee them reliable power, because we can't with the electrical system. We said, don't worry. We're buying 15 megawatts of firm transmission. We have Unit 2. We've got Unit 3. We've got plenty. Well, environmental regulations and MISO denying any firm service took that away. We're forced to do something. We have to serve you. When there's a demand, and I'll tell you, we do get a lot of calls when we do rate increases, and I don't blame them. We're happy to take them. We want to take them, actually, because the more we can talk to folks, the more we can go through this stuff and educate them. We're not trying to do anything that's not transparent. But I'll tell you what, if we have an outage, our phones are exploding. They are blowing up. We can't even answer them that fast. And that might not even be a long outage. It might be 15 minutes, 20 minutes. But they're off the hook. People do not, and I don't blame them, they do not accept power outages. They will not.
So what are the chances, and would it make sense or even be feasible to try to cut that 30% or 40% even in the next year, rather than one big hit? I mean, leaving it the way it is
That's
might be
fair.
easier to budget for some, especially the bigger corporations that they do maybe 2-year budgets. It might be easier. But
That
at
was
least
our,
make it a little more incremental.
that's a perfect question. And that was our original intent. So when we came to the community and we said we need 8.5% over 3 years, our original intent was to continue with those, to build up reserves, so when we had to fund a project, and we were hoping within the next 5 to 7, that now instead of a large rate increase, much smaller, much more palatable. That changed for us in October. When we lost the 15 megawatts firm transmission from the grid, and then seeing that if we put the money into Unit 2 like we had planned doesn't really solve our quick start generation needs, we've got to do something. We have a problem. And that problem is likely going to grow.
Are you able to get grants or anything? Any federal?
We looked for everything. We looked for agriculture. We've talked to the Department of Agriculture. We've talked to the state. They're good at giving some tax breaks to for-profit entities. Then munis are a different animal for some reason. You think those would be the people they'd be helping out the most. That's not the case.
Well, those were my concerns, not that I may not have more questions later
Sure,
too,
no.
but let's see what our group says. Ernie,
Just
start on this end?
Start of that and work this.
Yeah, I only got 5 pages, so.
Okay.
Forget Pete.
Actually, I was saving him till last.
Go ahead, why don't you start over there and I can cross off some of mine then?
Yeah.
Ernie or John? Dan?
Well, okay, I'll start. I mean, I don't have a lot of questions, but just a few comments. It's obvious that, and the township itself is also in fault of this. The fact that the long-range planning for 20 years, it should have been, obviously if you would have made small increases you'd be prepared for this kind of a thing that would happen, but it's the same thing happened to us. It's one of those things that just, you don't want to raise rates, but, So the fact that we got hit with that we're getting hit with a big rate that's the way it's going to be. But, and deregulation obviously didn't work at all for the consumer. I mean, it's great for everybody else. So I can see where this is an advantage. I mean, it is, we have our own, the Board of Light and Power has its own supply and everything else, plus obviously emissions and everything else is going to be greatly curtailed and everything else. So I guess one of my questions I got is, and if the way I understand this is in the summertime, then basically the Shires plant will be shut down. And we'll be relying strictly on these units?
Well, that's kind of the beauty of this. It gives us a much greater flexibility to control our power supply costs, but let's take these Wartsillas or this recip plant off the table. The CO2 regulations were going to shut the Shiver steam plant
Right.
down for a period of the year, regardless, which was fine with us because we had time to plan. Those things aren't going to go into effect for a good 7 to 10 years. Forced to make this move today, make it in a way that gives you the greatest amount of flexibility, and by doing multiple shafts like this, let's say prices on the grid are cheap, shut them down. Takes 2 seconds to fire, takes 5 minutes to fire them up.
Right.
Can't do that with the steam plant though. It takes 8 hours to bring those units down, 8 hours to bring them up. And they're boilers. They're not meant to ramp up, ramp down, ramp up. These engines, that's what they're designed to do. From our standpoint, this might be, you hate to be forced into things, but it could turn out to be a good thing for the community in the long run. Right now, we can't shut Shirus down at night when load drops off, and power prices off the grid are cheap. Now, if the grid can't support it, if they can't give us the transmission that we need, you can't use the grid. But if they can and we can utilize it, these things give us that opportunity to do it when power prices are cheap because no one's running power. Everybody's sleeping.
So again, basically, but I guess my question is that the plan is to run these units rather than the Shires plan in the summer?
If it's cheaper than the
If it's
grid
cheaper
and the
than-
grid's not available. If the grid's more expensive, we'll run them. If the grid's cheaper and we can get the transmission, we're probably going to utilize the grid more if we can.
Okay. So basically, and in 2020, when the CO2 emissions become in effect, Unit 3 is already, would meet those, or you're going to have to?
We'll meet them by dispatching it less.
So basically, in 2020, we're probably going to eliminate Unit 3 also, or?
No.
No.
No, that's a great unit for us.
Okay. So, I mean, that would meet the standards without adding too much money to the?
Let's talk about that, because that's a good question, Dan. Right now, gas is $3.50 a million BTU. It's pretty cheap. It's cheap as it's been a long time. A decade ago, it was like 11. That's high. By dispatching Unit 3 less, we preserve the life on that unit. So there's a dual benefit to these. Not only does it fix the reliability issue, it extends the life of our base load generating assets. And so Unit 3's got 20 years worth of operational life at an 80% capacity factor, which is what we run it today. We run it almost all year long. If we knock that down to 40, now maybe instead of retiring that Unit 3 at 2035, now maybe we're out to 2050, 2060. And so if gas prices spike again, dispatch your coal unit. You can only dispatch it so much, but at least it's an asset you have. And so we'll have the capability and the fuel flexibility of electrical prices off the grid, natural gas prices, coal. We're actually going to be set up better than almost any utility out there, because right now in the state of Michigan, there's 2,000 megawatts of planned retirement. There's a huge concern on our end as to what electrical prices are going to happen in the state of Michigan when they retire those 2,000 megawatts. Everybody talks about it. Everybody says they're concerned. We're just not seeing a lot of movement from people, and that's what's scary to us. We're not seeing a lot of movement from the industry.
But I guess my question is Presque Isle is closing down basically because the cost to meet the emission controls that they would have to put into those units was prohibitive of keeping the units running.
Right.
Now, so my question is Unit 3, are you going to have to add those costs to bring those up to meet those standards in 20, or are they
Unit
there now?
3's got all the bells and whistles.
So it's there now? There'll be
Other
no-
than CO2, and CO2 will be dealt with by dispatching it less.
Okay. So then basically, and with this, you have the feasibility of obviously adding more units to it that you could, if you need the more power, it's there. The
If
three-
demand grows. Sure, we could.
Okay. That's basically all I have.
Go ahead, John.
First, I want to say thanks for coming. Thank you each and every one of the board members. I've given this some thought, as everybody on this board has, and I want you to understand that I understand that the Board of Power and Light Board, you folks out here, have the unquestioned independent authority to determine the best means to provide electric service to your customers. You have that, much like some of the authority that comes to this board. And your board has recommended the proposed plan to the City Commission as you're required to do, I guess. And you acquired their support for the plan from concept to fruition. So that's 2 boards that have looked at it and approved it. That's something that I noted along the way as I read all the reports. And with that support, the time has passed for seeking authority to proceed. And that's what I see. You're not asking for our blessing on your project. You're here to give us information and primarily provide information and answer our questions. And that's what this meeting really is all about. Again, for that, I thank you. I thank you for coming and doing that. However, because you're locating this project on the edge of our 2 communities, 2 possible pollution questions need to be addressed. And I'm sure they can, and I'm going to give you a copy of this so you don't have to make a lot of notes. If you can, please give us assurance that our community will not be adversely impacted by any air or noise pollution from this project. I think that's a reasonable request for us to make. Your towers, when they come for the standard generator, are they sufficient in height that they can thrust the startup emissions that must come out of this unit, can thrust those emissions to a level as to not adversely impact our residents who live on the bluff to the south of your site? I think that's a reasonable question for us to make, and if you can give us that assurance, that'll help with our community. The second question that I have, and it's the only 2 I have, has the noise made by just one of the ordered generators running at full speed been recorded at a decibel level that we can review? We've asked that question, and we ask it of you folks as well. We asked it of the manufacturer. I assume that that's on its way, and we appreciate that. But our township property line is located just about 1,000 foot away from your front door to your office complex. So we're nearby. And while I don't think we should be questioning the wisdom of the decisions made and approved by your board and by the commission, I think it's imperative that we ask these questions and get the answers and be reasonably comfortable with the answers we get to satisfy our residents that their township body has met its responsibility. So those are the 2 questions I have. I'll give you a copy of this, and I hope we can hear from you soon. It's a reasonable request to make, and one more time I want to say thanks for coming.
Thanks for having us. I can answer it tonight if that's okay.
Sure.
Both questions. Let's start with emissions, because that's kind of my background. I got a degree in environmental engineering, so this is right up my alley. On the screen, we've got 2 generating sets. One is Shirus Unit 3. The other are all 3 reciprocating internal combustion engines operating at full load, which means we don't shut them off for even an hour. Not realistic, but we just have to, when we go through our air permitting process, we always have to go through a worst case scenario. And so this is the worst case scenario on the Marquette Energy Center. The Shirus Unit 3, those are the 2014 emissions. We haven't quite calculated the 2015 yet. We're required to submit them by the end of the month. So if you look at the NOx, that's oxides of nitrogen, all 3 reciprocating internal combustion engines running 8,760 hours a year, 82 tons a year. The Shirus steam plant, just Unit 3, not Unit 2, 380 tons a year for NOx, 1 unit. 3 units for sulfur dioxide emissions running all year long, 4 tons per year. Shirus Unit 3 running at about 8,500 hours, 246, and that wasn't running full bore all year long either. CO2 emissions, 266,701 tons per year, all 3 units combined. Shirus Unit 3, 2014, 402,720. So from an emission standpoint, much less. Gas is a much cleaner fuel. These are much more efficient units. We do have an air permit application in right now, and dispersion modeling is a huge concern. And what drives that usually is hillsides. We have one right next to this plant. That's what's going to determine stack height. Right now the stack height is modeled at 100 feet, which is needed to make sure that the residents don't have a downstream effect. Not as large of a hill next to the one at Shirus. That's why those stacks are much higher.
How about the generation units that you're purchasing?
That would be these. These are the gen sets that we're purchasing. The green is the
Okay,
planned gen
thank you.
sets. The red is what's down at the Shirus steam plant, just Unit 3.
Could you just give us what the standards, if you happen to know them offhand, what the standard emission are going to be?
Well, that will go through the permitting process, but I'll give you an example.
I mean, what the government's saying you have to meet.
Like on a pound per hour basis?
Well, I guess in comparison to what we have up there,
That's a ton per year, so that'll give you a good basis as to Shirus Unit 3 meets all the emission standards. Remember, it's got all the bells and whistle, and that's where that's at. These things are much cleaner
Okay.
than coal-fired generation. And you want me to move to the noise one, John, on the decibel readings? I can do that. So we got some information from the manufacturer, and I was just talking to Pete. He's actually got some comparisons. We did go up to Alaska and visit a site up there just to get a feel for how loud these things are, what kind of inventory they got, how they run. The engine hall inside, it's pretty loud. You've got to wear hearing protection. Surprisingly outside, it's not. But they have to design this plant based on the background noise level. And so the amount of baffling and insulation that's needed so you don't hear things from a distance is dependent on what your background noise is. So we have to conduct a noise study to determine how to design the plant. And that's going to be conducted probably within the next 2 months. And that'll impact the baffling and the silencing and the insulation system of the engine hall. But right now, what they've told us is 70 decibels. And Pete, what was the equivalent to 70 decibels? A vacuum cleaner. So that they are pretty quiet from the outside. From the inside, they're noisy. They're loud. And the steam plant's the same way. The steam plant's loud in the inside, but you know, how many of you have swam at South Beach? I grew up down there. Swam all day, and you're a couple hundred meters away, and the noise isn't bad. These will be the same. Good question, though. But rather than just give you a verbal answer, we wanted to be able to show you something. You're welcome.
Ernie, go ahead.
Okay, I have some questions. I get back to cost all the time,
Sure. Fair.
and they all kind of laugh when I talk about cost and that. When you talk about cost, you always refer to your Marquette customers. When you really look at the bills between the city of Marquette customers and your external customers, there's a differential at what's being charged in that. So in reality, your 30% is going to be more for non-Marquette city customers than anyone else in that. So that's a concern I have. I've always had that because I could never see the justification for it. I know you went out with the consultants and that, and the consultants get paid to do a job in that. I think we're close enough that we all should be paying the same rate all the way down the line in that too. So, but you're utilizing that for your financial planning and that too, what the rates are going to be in that. So I had to bring that up because I have gotten people who have talked to me on that. Why we're paying more than the city people are paying.
And that's a fair question, and that's what these types of discussions give us an opportunity to address that we don't normally if we don't talk. So how a utility system works is the more compact and dense it is, the cheaper it is from a distribution standpoint and transmission standpoint. You don't have as many poles, you don't have as many wires, transformers, insulators, capacitors, the works. The further out you go, the more wire you got, the more poles you got, the more equipment you got from a distribution standpoint. It is strictly on a cost to serve basis. The closer everybody is, the cheaper they are to serve as a group. The further out they get, the more expensive they are. So if we charged everybody the same, the folks that live in the city that's dense are going to end up subsidizing a portion of that additional wires and poles. It's not a big difference, but we strictly do it on cost to serve. That's just how it's always been. It's how we've continued it. That's why.
I think also following that same direction is that when the big boxes came into the township, once they came into it, they're running their power usage 24/7, which means that you have to supply power, which before, if you didn't supply the power, or you had the power available and there was no one using it, you can't, it's not like a light switch, you can't turn it on and off. So it's just going, and that, as we brought the big boxes in, the power that you are generating were being used continually, and that, because they're running 24/7, and every time we bring in a big box or bring in something that's running 24/7, they're utilizing power that you probably would not have been able to sell in the past in that. So that is that's a, I would say, is a positive for utilizing your electrical and that. So every time the township brings on something like this here, it's beneficial to you because you're running 24/7. You're not losing any power. You're not costing you any money. It's there and that too. So it's a double-edged sword when you really look at it as to how you want to handle it.
Now, and that's a good point too, Ernie, on big customers, because the one question we always get is, why are business rates on $1 per kilowatt hour less than a residential rate? So a big box store, it's running all the time. We have two components for them. Instead of a fixed customer charge and a kWh charge, a variable energy charge, we have a demand charge and an energy charge. And the reason why you do that is, let's say I get up in the morning and I turn on my coffee pot and I take a shower, and I do take showers from time to time, put my clothes on, I go to work. I shut everything off. Then I come home and everything's on, the kids are running around, they got their iPads running, the TV going, wife's cooking dinner. A couple hours later we run the dishwasher and we go to bed. We shut everything off again. So we've got a big peak when I wake up, drop when I go to work, big peak when we all get home, drop when we go to bed. A box store, they're on. There is no peaks and valleys, and that's why we do demand, and that's why their energy rate is low. They actually are cheaper to serve from an energy standpoint because we don't have to build a system that they're only going to peak at twice a day. They're on consistent the whole day long. So if I got to build let's say a generating asset for me personally, well, somehow the utility's got to recoup that cost from when I'm peaking to when I'm not using anything. Well, with a high usage customer that's on all the time, we put that thing in for them and they're running it all the time. They're drawn from the system all the time. We like those kinds of loads. We like high, stable loads. And water treatment plants are no different. Drinking water plants are no different. Consistency is great. Spikes, valleys, much more expensive to serve. And so from a big box store perspective, that's how we cover those. That's why their electrical component rate is less, is because we charge them a demand component instead. Does that make sense? I mean, I've been doing rates for 3 years, and the first year in, none of this made sense to me, and I had all sorts of perceptions and philosophies, and as I learned, as I dug into it, it makes sense. It really does make good sense on how they're set up that way.
Can I just ask a quick question on that?
Sure.
Considering the rate increases, and I understand the reasoning that rural areas are going to pay more for electricity because of the distance that obviously the power is going to travel. From the Shire steam plant to out here is obviously going to cost more than from the Shire steam plant to downtown Marquette. But in that instance, then, how can you say the fact that you're now moving all these generators out here to 1,000 feet of the township line? It's actually reversed now, isn't it? Because now it's going to be.
It's not so much of where if we were locating these generators down in Wisconsin, then the energy from the power station to the end user is going to have an impact, but that short distance, it's not so much where the generators are located, it's the distribution and transmission system. That's what drives that cost.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, other thing, just reading the paper, listening to everything, and talking about your bond and indebtedness coming up with $77 million and that. I've always looked at bond indebtedness when, strictly from the township side and anyone else, when you come up with X number of dollars for that. It never seems to be that. It always seems to be above that all the time. It always goes more and more. And so when you say 77 million, I look at that and I think, you're gonna be more than that by the time you get through with everything. And how much more, I don't know, but, that's my concern with, where that's gonna actually end up, plateau at. Rather than 77, is it going to be 80, is it gonna be 90, is it gonna be 100 million? Time you get through with all this, and how that's gonna affect financial planning in that too, so that's another concern.
That's a concern of ours as well. Of course, anytime you're building something like this, that's why we built in contingencies, and we've got a 15% contingency. And just to give you a scale, Tourist Park, we had a 5% contingency, and we estimated it would cost us $5 million, and it cost us $4.97 million to build it. In this case, when it's $65 million, you don't want to run it that tight, because you're right. If you go over on $65 million, it could go over decently. Now, $65 million is with a 15% contingency, so if the project comes in less, if we don't burn up the contingency, the demand on those rates in the future will be less. But we had to put in what we felt was a conservative contingency, so that, and $65 million is with the contingency, because we don't want, let's say maybe it was a $52 million project, we don't want to turn it into $70 million. You've got to plan for some unknown expenses. You'll have it every time you build, and in this case, we put in 15% of unknown expenses. If it costs us less, that's a good thing. We hope it does.
Do we want to continue on? Yeah.
5 more minutes? I'd like to hear from you guys.
I will turn it over to the rest of them. I have a couple more questions, but I'll let them go.
And I again want to thank the BLP for coming tonight. I think this has been very informative for the residents. We have taped this, and I'll have this on the YouTube on our township site for our residents to review that couldn't make it tonight. The only, I guess, question or concern is how firm are the environmental regs? It seems to me whatever party comes to power can either restrict or tighten them. So depending on what party is in power after November, you know, are we going to be, what, we've done our job in future planning. I'm just saying, is it if they lessen the restrictions going forward, like with these coal-fired plants, because there's lots of them out there, where would that put us? I mean, I would hate to put all this money into this, and then it's like, well, we're lessening the restrictions on our coal-fired plants, and we can run, the Shire steam plant for many more years, and we got 3 units out there that might not ever run.
That's a good question. These units cost about $37 a megawatt hour to dispatch, these gas units. Go back to earlier in the discussion when I mentioned Unit 3, about $45 a megawatt hour. They're cheaper to run. So if we've got to build these from a reliability perspective, and we do, we're trying to do it in a way that allows us to dispatch these things whether coal regulations get tightened, they don't get tightened, whether we can keep coal for another 30 years, we can't. We sure would like to keep Unit 3 as long as we can. Will they get restricted? And I got to tell you, I've been doing environmental compliance for 15 years. The CO2 ship has sailed. It may get delayed. It's coming. It's just coming. And back when I first started, mercury emissions were going to kill the utility industry, destroy it. We have to control mercury emissions. We're all going to be living in the dark. We ended up doing a pilot program in 2008 where we blended coals and we got 98% removal. It can be done. It's just initially, when it first comes out, no one's doing it, no one knows how to do it. You got a little municipality up in Marquette that figures out how to get 98% mercury removal just by blending coals. That's amazing. I think CO2, whether it'll get removed, whether it'll shut units down, it's going to happen. It's just a matter of time. It's too far gone.
Lightning round, quick answers.
Fire away.
4.5, 4.5, is that set? Is that's going to happen or not happening? Or-
That's
I
not
hear different-
set. No, that was just based off the projections we got. If the plant cost us more to build or other expenses go up, it could be higher. If we can come in under the contingency and we can control expenses through power supply, it could be less. It's the whole reason why we didn't want to lock it in. because we don't know what, we have a projection on what it'll be. We got to get it built, get it running. If gas prices go down, it won't be as high. If gas prices go up, it could be a little higher. A lot of the things that drive that are really out of our control, other than how well we manage this project in its construction.
Just want to note that the residents are really concerned about the increase. You know, what they tell me is when you're on fixed income and stuff like that, that Social Security was never raised, but we're always getting raised. The township just put a road millage in. We asked for their support on that. They did that. Now we're going to have 35, 41% on this thing if it goes through the way projected is. And they're very concerned. Businesses, they get it, they pass it on into their operations. All right. And then some of the stores get the dark store tax break and they get another break. So they sort of, but the residents are paying the brunt of it. Solar panels in front of the light and power, is that part of the funding?
No, in fact, that
completely
is strictly a ratepayer funded project on the customers that want to invest in it. Money coming out of the general fund of the Board of Light and Power isn't a dime of the money in the general fund is not going to that. It's strictly if you want a solar panel and you want to pay, I hate to even throw out a number because we just got the bids back, we got to evaluate them, but if you want to buy a solar panel, you can invest in it. So if you live in an apartment building and you don't have the ability to do rooftop solar, or if you have a house and rooftop solar is just too doggone expensive for you to invest in, you can invest into this. But for a customer that does not like solar, doesn't want it, think it's too expensive, they won't invest a dime. It won't cost them a dime through their rates.
Some people don't like how close it is to the road and would like to see it set back, but I understand there's no site plan set up on that yet as of today.
Nope, not yet.
People
We're
are
just in the preliminary stage.
Right, questions about selling to Big Bay and that you asked, you already answered that one.
Okay.
No site plan, solar bonding for solar panel, and that won't be part of it.
No.
Okay. Height of the chimney emissions, we covered that.
Yes.
All right. Gas supply. Are you guaranteed gas supply?
Only in the spring and summer months. We call it spring and fall, shoulder months in the summer.
In the
In
winter,
the
we're not
wintertime,
guaranteed?
we are guaranteed enough to run one unit, which is why they have to be dual fueled. In the wintertime, we're not going to run these things if we don't have to. I mean, if the gas supply is available, if the usage isn't high, like say this past December, it probably wasn't that high, it wasn't that cold, and those units are cheaper to run than the grid or cheaper to run Unit 3, well, yeah, then we're going to utilize them. I mean, we're going to run as economically as possible, but we're trying to fix a reliability need with a mechanism that allows us to be as flexible as we can be in our power supply cost. And these, so I'm not going to say we're not going to run them in the wintertime. If gas is available and it's cheapest, you bet we'll run them.
Can you sell to the grid?
Yes, we do right now.
Are you
We
gonna
pull
get rid-
and buy.
Are you going to get rid of any of the coal plants?
Unit 2 is probably going to be retired eventually. It's an expensive unit to run. It's old, it needs emission controls, and if we're going to put the money into these, we can't be putting money into everything.
We're going to have to add on more employees for this, or in the book it says they run over 500 plants, and if you choose to run it or they run it.
No, the employees, actually it takes less employees to run this than it does the steam plant, which works out good because at times we're not running the steam plant, we'll have staff to run this new plant.
Okay. Takes a gallon of gas to run it, and a gallon of water, not gas.
I wish it took a gallon of
Yeah.
gas. I'm going to buy a recip from you.
All right. I just had one power board authority, if there are any thoughts about creating a power authority board for that, for in the future. But,
No talk chat.
all right. Well, I want to thank you for coming again, and also there's a lot of questions out there, that's why I wanted to ask some of them, and some of them I already answered, so I didn't ask the same question, so. Plus, when we talked today, and we discussed a couple of things, and I got more answers, so at least I feel more comfortable going out and explaining it too. If somebody asks me, you know, I'd say, well, I don't know. You know, I don't like that feeling, so.
And feel free to send them to us. I mean,
I will.
we really want people to come to our board meetings to understand why we're doing what we're doing. That's important because we've done a series of community forums. 2 of them at the city commission chambers. We've done open houses. We've done mailers. It's tough to get people engaged and involved, and if you guys got suggestions, honestly, I mean this, we will take them. We want to encourage folks to come to our board meetings, come talk to our staff. It's important that they know what we're doing so that we're not out fighting all this misinformation. When they can see it, no one's going to be happy about the rate increase. We're not even happy about making a move this big in our rates. But we have an obligation to serve. We have to maintain the electrical reliability of our system. That's what the board is accountable for. We take it seriously, and I hope they want us to take it seriously. I know they do when there's an outage because they blow our phones up.
Well, you know, just like tonight, all the information for about this meeting was sent on emails to all the residents, whoever's registered with our township, and you see what we have. For the road millage, we had 18 meetings that we had, whole meetings, and we had, you know, not that good of a turnout. So we have to give some way of doing that, but thank you for trying. When's your next meeting? With who?
We have Chalkley Township tomorrow. The county is either at the end of January or the beginning of February. I'm from those details up. And we likely will be taking some of the smaller townships and combining them into one. Some townships like Ishpeming will only serve a handful of customers, so we'll combine them with another township, just Negaunee Township possibly.
A suggestion on the solar panels, instead of putting it out in front of your building, you got a brand new public works building going in, put it up there. All right, thank you very much.
So how can we stay in contact to know what's going on? How can you inform the board, or can you make
You know, we
monthly
work at the direction of the board, and this was the direction of the board, to reach out to the townships in the county. You're always welcome to contact our board members. They're very receptive to that. Our board meetings are the second and the last Tuesday of every month. Anybody that wants to come and speak to the board, there's 2 public comment sections for every board meeting. And if you want to see us come speak, we've been speaking at the Rotary, Kiwanis. There really isn't a group we won't talk to. There's not a group we're not willing to present information at. It's a big lift, we get it. And we need to put ourselves out there, and we need to be transparent with the information, and we hope we have been. We're trying to be. And if people feel that we're not, call us up. Tell us what we need to do. We're willing.
Well, if we can get updates somehow, whether it just means we need to go to the website or get some newsletter or email link or something.
We'll be sure to do that. That's great.
That would
A
be
great
good.
suggestion.
Okay, something we can put on our website too, maybe even a link, updates. Okay, I think we're good. We kept you long enough.
Thank you guys. Thank you for the time.
information. It was a great presentation.
Thanks.
We're going to take a 15-minute or 10-minute break before we start our meeting.
I hope we didn't keep you guys too long. John, thanks. Danny, it was good